This is my interview with my grandmother, Durene Wentworth Manson, and my mother, Patricia Manson Champluvier. Okay, so can you tell me who Calvin Livermore is?
You've got the...
Calvin T. Livermore was born in 1939 in Quebec, Maine. He served in the military. He enlisted in 1861 and served until 1864. He passed away when he was probably about 24, 25 years old.
So he enlisted when in the volunteers when he was only, what, 18 or less?
18 or less, I'd say.
I know he was keeping a farm in Bradley.
Yeah, he was a good old farm boy, very religious.
But he also lusted after someone's yoke of oxen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He raised wheat and rye and, of course, produce other than that.
And the reason we talk a lot about Calvin in our family because we have over 30 or more letters from when he served in the military.
And accompanying letters from the rest of the family, which kind of tie it together so that when we make our book, it's going to be fine.
Yeah, the thing is when you get your Civil War letters and you get into the history, you can tie in faces and places and feelings, and it brings movies like watching Gettysburg really come to life because it makes it more personalized. You know people, you actually feel them, because in his letters there's so much detail. And
how many great-grandfathers have you got back here?
I've gone back just from Calvin 6. I can probably go back more. I am still in the process of working on it. But Calvin is my 6th great-grandmother's nephew, if I remember right. Yeah, it's a nephew. No, it's her brother. It's her brother. Calvin is my great-great-great-great-grandmother's brother. And at the same time, Betsy had a brother named David, who had a son named William T. Livermore, who was also serving in the Maine 20th, Company B.
And he was a sergeant. Calvin was a sergeant, too, a first sergeant. And he had been invited at some point later on, before he expired, to lead a unit of colored.
By color, do you mean?
Afro-Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But he felt very religious about the fact, because religion was a big thing back then, and he didn't think he could serve the men correctly. So
he just refused
to do it.
But he still maintained his rank, and he worked for the officers. Now, you have a picture of William there.
Yeah, I have a picture of William, which Katie can get a picture of eventually.
And you have one of the tintype of Calvin, which came out of this, which has some of the relatives in it. And we have some maps that Calvin drew, and he was very intelligent and learned for the age he was, because the letters are very well written.
They're well written, but very poor grammar.
No, that was the way they thought.
Yeah, but when you meet someone, it's M-E-E-T, not M-E-A-T. But, but going through the history, we have also found out we have had more than enough relatives. We also found out on my father's side, we have William Colonel Day Manson. He was at the Great Battle of Gettysburg, still working on it. It's just been interesting going through and actually feeling how Calvin felt while he was there.
Well, I found out, that even my sister's husband's family had a doctor, Gaslon, who also was governor, he ran Bangor for a while there.
Yeah.
And he inoculated half of the troops with a chicken pox virus.
Smallpox.
Oh, is it smallpox or chicken pox?
Smallpox.
Because that's why they cooled their feet there for the first year, and then he went back and, of course, planted his garden and whatnot.
But we have gone through, because it was questioning because of his, they wrote in calligraphy back then, and, you know, the fancy writing, if you don't know what that means, whether or not his middle initial was J, T, or P. And I found records of the Great Gettysburg and found out his middle initial is T. The T standing for Tyler, which was his mother's... Taylor, which was his mother's maiden name. So that made it...
Can you tell what some of the letters have written on the inside of them?
Basically, a lot of the letters in the beginning was telling family how they were doing. A lot of the boys all came from the same area, so if somebody saw someone else's son, they say, well, I saw William Thomas tell his parents that he's doing well. That's how word got back home about their families.
But it took a long time because it took, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, Izetta B. Dodge, which was, she was a Dodge. She was born in the midst of the Civil War. They wanted Calvin to name her, and he said, no, go ahead and name the baby. So she was how I remembered the Civil War.
Yeah.
And I lost my train of thought. Thank you. Ask another question.
Okay. In some of the letters, it talks about how there were dead horses in the water that they were drinking, and
They were drinking from upstream.
They were drinking from upstream. What it was is they had marched all night long. They ran out of water. So when they came to water, they drank. No matter how muddy it was or dirty or filthy, if there was a dead animal in it, they drank. And a lot of them got sick, of course, because they didn't sterilize water.
Dysentery, but then I always thought he died from dysentery, but you think he died from a heart attack.
No, from a letter from his cousin, which came in 1864. He mentions that he ran into Calvin in the Miners' Run, which if you look into your history, it took place in 64. And around November. It was in November. He ran into Calvin about a week before. But William wrote a letter home stating that he was told that Calvin had died suddenly due to heart disease. Calvin was one of the lucky few because most men were buried right there in Virginia or wherever they died. But
there was one relative that wrote a letter in one of the other letters that we've got, that he'd be willing to take the horse and the wagon and go to Pennsylvania and pick up the body. And he did.
So
because he's buried in
Bradley,
Maine.
Maine, which is not far.
No.
From here.
That's where his farm was, apparently. Because he had gotten...
The family had moved to Bradley, Milo, Sebec area. That's basically because...
I thought his family was still in Sebec.
Because William
was in Milo.
Is buried in the Evergreen Cemetery in Milo with his family. Because his cousin William did return from the war. And he actually sold part of his land to bring the railroad through Milo, Maine.
That's interesting.
And when my Gram Lynn was born, and she did marry a John Lynn, but she still was Grammy, or Nana. No, she was great-Gram.
Great-Gram.
But she said that it took a week to get news that that President Lincoln had been shot.
Yeah.
And today we get it almost before it happens.
Yeah. But the thing is you can see as you read through the years, because we've got letters from 61, 62, 63, and 64. Towards the end, the men were tired of the war. There was letters going home saying, don't let our brothers and sisters join. You know, they love their country, but They just didn't want him to fight in the war.
Okay.
Why didn't they want them to fight in the war?
Because even like they do it nowadays, there was one letter in there that I remember that said, we shot half of our own troops in the dark. One was supposed to be one place and one was supposed to be another, and they both were in the same place, and they didn't know they were both Union soldiers.
Wow.
And they also would go across the trenches at a holiday and have a drink or a cigarette with family from the other side.
Yeah, because you had not just brother fighting brother, cousin fighting cousin, family fighting family. You know, it depended on where you stood in the whole idea of the war. But the thing is Calvin, being as religious as he was just getting tired. The men of the main 6th Regiment
Had been there since
61. But the thing is, towards the end, they basically were being disrespected by their commanding officers. They basically weren't feeding them, clothing them, making sure they were warm or sheltered.
But at first, of course, this was down south. He sent the top coat home by one of the chamberlains, not Joshua, but his brother.
Yes, his brother. I can't remember the brother's name.
And the letters went the same as, which was by him. Otherwise, they were franked, and they had no postage.
No.
They were franked. And I remember him saying, "Too bad, Mother, that you have to go without underwear," and because the underwear was long-legged pantaloons in the wintertime, so that they could send him a pair of boots.
Because I remember one letter where he begged for socks.
And there was another letter where he was comparing how much he had to pay for his own food, a hat.
Because the military...
They had to pay for their own stuff?
Yeah, they did. And towards the end, the commanding officer stopped paying them, stopped feeding them. The soldiers were going hungry, so maybe...
They went home without any... They were owed money by the government.
That's why a lot of them got land towards the end. But towards the end, they got accepted into... Basically, Main 6 was dropped off with Main 7, and things got better. They do have a monument on the battlefield of Gettysburg for the Main 6, which I think was great that they finally did that. I got a picture of it.
The Main 6 is the one that Calvin fought in, correct?
Yeah, Main 6. It was a volunteer.
And he was in the last battle of Round Top. I think they went up Round Top twice.
Yes, they went up twice.
And the second time, the guy that was Grant didn't want them to. And Joshua Chamberlain decided that they were going to go anyhow. They were closest.
Yeah.
And it was a very decisive battle.
But we did find out he was in Company I, 6th Regiment, Infantry of Maine Volunteers. And he was a first sergeant, Calvin was. Now, William was only a corporal.
And William
is his cousin.
Cousin?
Yeah. But they're about the same age.
And he was in the 20th Maine.
He was in the 20th Maine. They were like brothers. They served not far from each other. So they could run back and forth about a mile just to see each other.
He ran in he sprinted in order to get there to do it right. So it was kind of difficult.
But so basically his cousin
He had 6 minutes to talk to him.
William was the last one to see Calvin Livermore alive.
What did they do with the dead bodies? I remember you telling me something about a town where they...
Mass grave.
Burials. They called it, I think the City of Blood or something like that in the letters. Something along that line. It was mass burials.
Just everybody?
Of everybody. They would just throw all the bodies in one grave. And that was in Virginia.
Wow.
But it's just interesting to be, growing up listening to these stories.
This is the 150th, is it? 25th anniversary of it. I haven't done my proper addition and subtraction, but everybody has written a movie or a book on it. But if it's yours, it's more notable to you.
So how did you obtain these letters?
Well, when my father was downsizing, first there was a trunk sitting in my grandmother's attic, shall we say, and my uncle didn't want it. Dad took it home, and when he was downsizing, he says, well, everybody's got to pick before he came back from Illinois, so he says, you can take these Civil War letters and write a book. And I'm going to just as soon as I find my paperwork.
And so because of growing up around genealogy and grave stomping with her, it sparked an interest in me, and I just find it very educational. Doing the genealogy, you find a lot of history. And when
it becomes a little more alive to you.
It comes more alive to you when you can put a face, a name, someone in your family, having letters, reading what they went through, because I thought some of Calvin's letters where he talked about the moon and the stars and how he wishes he was home sitting on the heath, talking to his family, praying, because he was a very religious man. And
but he had a girlfriend.
Yeah. Yeah.
His mother, her mother, wrote a very odd letter back to the family.
Yeah.
But he went to a cotillion, a ball he was chosen as one of them to go to a ball in Pennsylvania, somewhere there.
Yeah.
And so he got around.
But he actually died not married. Calvin never had children. Now his cousin William did marry and had children and lived in Milo.
And there are all kinds of Livermores. They started out, I would think, as friends. I got that impression that from the religion that they're friends. And they would come up. Well, some of our friends, our relatives, came up to Kennebec. But this family probably came up the Penobscot and got to Sebec because they traveled back and forth from Sebec to Bradley across the ice in the wintertime.
Yeah, they came from Sebec. But before that...
And it was South Sebec and Sebec Station, and you've only got one now, it's just plain old Sebec.
But I have traced the whole family back to England. But that's a whole other story. Yeah. But it's very interesting. And
how much do you think you have to have any more questions?
But the thing is the reason we do this is not just for the enjoyment of it, learning the history. It's passing on the history to our children.
Because like you.
I find it relatively interesting.
My great-grandmother, my grandmother, your great-grandmother, Manette, belongs to DAR. I have the paperwork.
We can prove it.
You can prove it, and any near future or any time, they still have the Daughters of the American Revolution. And that was another story, too. He was a drummer boy.
Calvin was?
No.
Her father.
Your father?
No. The
Manette's
relatives.
Yes. Yes, so we've had not just in the Revolution, the actually French and Indian War, Civil War, World War I, World War II. We have relatives that have fought in just about every battle, starting here in Maine.
It's the pride.
It's the pride. It's the fact of learning your history and knowing where your family came from. Because we are not just soldiers. We are lawyers. We are doctors. We are
educators.
Teachers, shipmen, sea captains. I'm sorry to say we were even at one point slave owners. But guess what? We also gave those slaves their freedom too. We signed the papers for that. We have evolved. It's just one great big family finding your own
And we
family.
go from state to state
country to country.
And it's from California to Maine.
Maine to Scotland to France.
From.
Yeah. Well, we're all over the place, but we've come from Canada. We've come from Nova Scotia. We're just all over the place. It's just been interesting.
And Kittery has been in 3 different states.
Yeah, well, the thing is, that's been the interesting part is when you work on one family tree and you find out you married into the other side of the family tree along the line, because I was working on the Wentworths and found out we were married into the Mansons, and the Mansons were married later on, you know. So it's
More than once have the Wentworths and Mansons got together.
and the Bells, and yes, I'm still working on the Bell tree, and no, I have not found out if we're related to Alexander Graham Bell, who made the
He
phone.
had girls.
He had sons, but they died at young age too.
Yeah, but the only thing that lived to have children were the girls.
Were the girls, and
The last one died just about 4 years ago.
We were told we were related, but the connection has not shown up. We will find it if it's there. But
All right. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.